Um, Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Truma is Pedig Vav Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Noyach, Daf Nun Ches, beginning Mamish on top of the Amid. We're dedicating this class, L'Refuah Shalema, to Levi Halevi ben Leah. So, first of all, let's quickly review the final case we had on Daf Nun Zayin Amid Beis, a case in which we have a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Eish Lakish, and that is that if a person stole Truma from his maternal grandfather, the Zayda, the maternal grandfather, was a Kohen, and then the Zayda passed away, and the dynamic in the family was such that according to the laws of Yerusha, this grandson, the Ganef, was the one that inherited everything that belonged to his grandfather, which means that the Truma that came into his possession as theft now belongs to him. Then he went ahead and he ate it, not knowing it's Truma. He ochal Truma b'shoigeg. So now there's a machlokes. According to all opinions, he certainly must separate, designate the keren v'chomesh. Rabbi Yochanan says, and still it's not enough, he has to give it to a kohen, using the words mishalem lashevet. He has to give it to a tribe of the kohen, to a member of the Kohanic tribe. The Eish says no. The Eish says, I agree with you, Rabbi Yochanan, that since he ate Truma b'shoigeg, the kapara part of it, which is him taking his chulin misukanim and designating keren v'chomesh as the tashlumin, is a necessary step. But once he did that step, he can keep it for himself. Now, he's not a kohen. It doesn't mean he can eat it, but he can sell it to a kohen for whatever money the Demei Truma is worth. That was the machlokes that we left off yesterday, Shir. And we're going to have a little bit more of a back and forth between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, or other Amoraim getting involved, trying to prove it one way or the other. One of the areas that we will discuss today that will be an attempted proof to Reish Lakish against Rabbi Yochanan is a general rule of Asham Gezelos, and that is that when a person denies with an oath that they owe money, whether they owe the money, the Torah gives 5 examples, whether they owe the money because someone worked for them, whether they owe money because they stole from someone, whether they owe money because they damaged someone's property. It doesn't make a difference why they owe. But if Reuven owes and he denies with an oath, and then he himself does tshuva and he confesses by saying, I owe the money, I swore falsely, so then there is a unique law that the Ganef, who now did tshuva, the Baal Tshuva, has to pay keren v'chomesh and bring a korban Asham Gezelos. All right, so we have to bear that in mind. There's another din that we have to bear in mind, and that is that if a person misappropriates hegdish, if a person is moyel behegdish, they have to give back the hegdish, keren v'chomesh, and they have to bring a korban Asham me'ilos. We're not going to focus on the korban part, but we will focus on the chomesh part. In other words, now we have together 3 separate areas in the Torah for which you have to pay a chomesh as part of your kapara. You eat truma b'shoigeg, you eat a hegdish b'shoigeg, and in the case where there was this oath in denial and then an admittance, and we will see just these are the building blocks that will be needed for the first part of today's sugya. We're also going to go off a little bit about the laws of para aduma, that even though the Torah explicitly only says that the para aduma must be slaughtered outside of Yerushalayim, chutz mishalosh machnos, there's another din that not only does the shechita have to take place chutz mishalosh machnos, but in the exact same place where that para was slaughtered, that is the exact place where it must be burnt, and that will be also, we're going to see how we'll get into that. That will be part of our discussion today as well. Now, I want to bring up one other machlokes that we learned yesterday, machlokes Tanoim between Rabbi and Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon, which is extremely important. According to both Tanoim, when the person who ate Truma b'shoigeg designated the keren v'chomesh, it certainly automatically gets some Truma association. It's imbued with the kedusha of Truma vadai on some level, but the question is, does it become fully imbued with Kedushas Truma? Rabbi says no. Rabbi says that since the pasuk that tells us that you have to give keren v'choimish concludes with the words v'nasan lakoyin es hakodesh, so Rabbi says that matonosoi mikadashtoi. Only when you give it is it fully imbued with Kedushas Truma. Rabbi Loza but Rabbi Shimon says no, that hafrashasoi mikadashtoi. You designating it fully imbues it with Kedushas Truma. That is what we learned yesterday. We're going to have today, the Gemara is going to suggest that the machloikes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, the one that we just reviewed, is perhaps linked with the machloikes between Rabbi and Rabbi Loza ben Rabbi Shimon, and it's going to make a lot of sense. The final topic of today, which will also be potentially linked to the machloikes of Rabbi and Rabbi Loza ben Rabbi Shimon, again, whether matanosei mekadashtoi or whether hafrashasei mekadashtoi, is going to be the dinim connected to b'choros, which is that if a person has a firstborn male donkey born into his property, so he either has to redeem it on a goat or a sheep and give that to a kohen, and if he doesn't make such a redemption, then he's obligated to decapitate his firstborn donkey. Question will be, what happens if a person made such a redemption? He redeemed it on the sheep or the goat, but prior to giving the sheep or the goat to the kohen, the sheep died. Question is, are you chayiv to redeem it again, and if not, you have to decapitate your donkey? Or can he say, I already did the redemption? The fact that the sheep or the goat died, it's the kohen's loss. This machloikas, again, potentially, is going to be linked to the machloikas of Rabbi and Rabbi Loza ben Rabbi Shimon, whether the hafrasha is fully mekadesh it. You get it? Even though you didn't give it, it doesn't matter. Or, no, matonosei mekadashtoi. And prior to giving it to the kohen, the issue is not fully resolved yet, as we will see inside. Okay, so again, we're starting on Daf Nun Ches. Bear in mind again the machloikes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan holds that even though when the person ate the truma, it already belonged to him. He ganved it, but now it belongs to him. He has to pay the keren v'choimish to the shevet. He ate what belongs to him. Doesn't matter. The fact that he ate truma demands of him not only to designate keren v'choimish, but to give it. And Reish Lakish says no, that there's no such a din. You have to designate it, the keren v'choimish, but mishalem la'atzmai, again, doesn't mean that he'll eat it. He's not a kohen. His zayda was a kohen. Mishalem la'atzmai means that he gets to sell it. So says the Gemara and Dafra Amid, Amar Rabbi Yoinam, I want you to know that Kach Choyim Meishiv Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, that Reish Lakish has a great refutation. He can slug up Rabbi Yochanan, which is that he can tell him that Al Daitoch, according to you, the Tamar that you say, that it's not enough for his grandson to designate, but Mishalem L'Shevet. If that would be correct, I got a problem. And the problem will be from a Mishnah that we're going to be learning, God willing, tomorrow. This is a Mishnah that's trying to illustrate a scenario in where there is the maximum penalties of choimish that is involved in one single act of misappropriating or eating truma. Normally, you say eat truma, you have to pay keren v'choimish. The Mishnah wants to show you that there can be a scenario where you're going to eat it and you're going to have to pay 2 choimish. And the question will be that according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Mishnah should have given a case where you have to pay 3 choimish. Okay, what's the case that the Mishnah gives? For Hatanin, and we learned in the Mishnah, that if a person ganav trumas hegdish va'achol, in other words, there is truma that belonged to a kohen, and then the kohen took his truma and he was magdish it to the Beis HaMikdash. Which means that this truma has 2 layers of kedusha. It has truma, it first became truma, and now on top of it, it belongs to the Beis HaMikdash. As we mentioned in the introduction, that if a person is moyel behegdish, b'shoigeg, in this case would mean if someone ate just hegdish, Aside of the Korban Hasham Me'ilis that we're not going to focus on, the Torah also writes that the penalty is to pay back the Hegdish, not only the value of the Keren v'choimish. Over here, prior to becoming Hegdish, it was already Truma. And now, so go, not Truma Hegdish v'cholam. Someone ate it. So the Mishnah says, it's amazing. You only have to pay back one Keren, but you're Mishalim Shnei Chumshin, even though one Keren. I want to know a very important detail. Bechlal, the Mishnah says Ganav. Someone mentioned this yesterday. Maybe it was Kevan. By Geneva, generally the punishment is you got to pay kefil. I just want you to know.
Yeah, it was me. But yeah.
Okay, so I want you to know that when it comes, we have to just remember there are many dinim that the Torah writes that are not relevant to Hegdish. There is no din of kefil by Hegdish. That's a general rule. You have the din of moil be'egdish yechayv keren v'choimish. Okay, so mishalim shnei chumshe v'keren, and why is that? Because he ate truma and he ate hegdish. It's amazing, huh? Now the item has a value, whatever the value is. You can't pay two kerens. You only ate up one keren, but that penalty of a choimish is going to be double choimish and a choimish. Now you have to understand the logic of the Gemara. Again, the point of the Mishnah that we're going to learn tomorrow is to illustrate a scenario, a chiddush, right? That you do one act of achila, and you got to pay more than the usual. If there would be a case in which you do one act of achila and you would have to pay 3 choimish, if there would be such a case, then the Mishnah would have written it. Now, what would be such a case? Now, this is only according to Rabbi Yochanan, as I'll word out in a moment. According to you, v'yishalem shloisha. Now, what will be the case of v'yishalem shloisha? Imagine if this person who stole the truma, right, ganap trumas hegdish v'achala, look inside the top marafulda, v'yishalem gimel chumshin, echad b'shvil gezela, kigoin, not geneva, gezela, it's called asham gezelos, shegazal trumas hakoidish. And then he was approached by a temple treasurer and saying, hey, you stole. And he denies. And he takes an oath that he denied. And then he does tshuva and he confesses. Any type of denial of debt, again, like we said, it doesn't matter whether it's including, one of it will be gzela. He denies it. And yomayda, normally the rule is, aside of the asham gezelos, you got to pay a choimish. So why would we not include that case? I got to point something out. You have to make it clear. Why is it that this kasha is only according to Rabbi Yochanan? But first, let's read inside the Manafud. The kaim alon the mishalem choimish, v'hava leilatana lemisnei oid choimish the gezel. Now let me say the following words. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who just said, we just reviewed it twice already, that when a person steals and then they inherit it, they still must pay back the keren v'choimish to a kohen. What does that show you? That even though they own it, it's truma, it still belongs to the shevet of kohanim. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because over here, according to Reish Lakish, once you own it, it's no more. Once you own it, it doesn't belong to Kohanim at all. There's no yad of the Kohen in it. Oh, and therefore, let me just remember what's the vart over here. In other words, when he stole it from Hegdish, who is the claimant? Okay, I just remembered. There's one vart over here. I forgot. Now I remembered. There is no din of Asham Gezelos by Hegdish. That's the vart. That's already a given. Just like there's no din of Kefil by Hegdish, there's no din of Asham Gezelos by Hegdish, which means the Torah gives 5 examples. where I owe money and I deny it. I can owe money because I stole from you. I can owe money because you worked for me. I can owe money because I was mazik you. But if someone steals from Hegdish and they deny that they stole it from Hegdish, and then they admit it, there's no din of Hasham Gezelis. Hasham Gezelis is a parsha between people, not between man and Hegdish. So therefore, it's self-understood why the Mishnah doesn't mention this case. Why? Because the Mishnah is speaking about a case where someone was magdish the truma. But according to Rabbi Yechanan, that doesn't work. Because according to Rabbi Yechanan, just like he says that even when I own it, that means I yashened it from my grandfather, it still belongs to Kohanim. Truma always is something that belongs to Kohanim, even if I own it. Likewise, even though it belongs to Hegdish, mitzad, the side of Hegdish, there is no din of Asham Gezelos, the Ken Choimish and Asham Gezelos, but it's still Truma. So since it's still Truma, it should be owned enough by commoners, Kohanim, for us to, yes, apply the din of the Choimish of Asham Gezelos. That's the chap. Look how gavalik this is. Really works. In other words, of course, the Mishnah doesn't mention the case of Hasham Gezelis because you are magdish it. That's a given. But since you, Rabbi Yechanan, say that just like when a person owns it personally, since it began as truma, it still belongs to Kohanim. V'harayef, even though I ate it when I owned it, I have to mishalem l'shevet. So Kohanim always have their hand in truma. So it makes sense that even in the case where they were magdish it, you can't say that Kohanim have no hand in it. It's Truma. Truma belongs to the Kohanim. Mitzad that, we should apply the din of the Chaimish of Hasham Gezelos. And why wouldn't the Mishnah mention that case?
Meaning the Mishnah would have mentioned that case would have been better because why?
Because all of these types of Mishnayos are trying to illustrate a scenario where you do one Maisa Achila, and instead of you being chayv to pay one Chaimish, two Chaimish. If there would be a case, the most crazy case, if there would be a case where you chayiv 3, the Mishnah would have mentioned it. Always works that way, right? You eat one this and you chayiv 8 karbanos. Yeah, but many times you haven't heard of Shabbat Peh.
The fact that it didn't seem
Means because you wouldn't. Why wouldn't you? Because it's hegdish. But according to Rabbi Yechanan, just like, that's the kasha, just like when it belongs to me, it still belongs to Kohanim. When it belongs to hegdish, it still belongs to Kohanim. Gavaldik. So,
but then it shouldn't matter that it's hektish, even if it's just truma. If he stole it, he'd still be chayv too.
if he denies it, yeah. But now the
Even like this originally should have been.
no, because in other words, you can find a case where not only did he steal it, but he also swore and then he was moidim. And chanami, that for sure is chayv too. There's no doubt. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped. So the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yasa says in the name of Rabbi Yechanan that I disagree with you. Once it belongs to Hegdish, if it belongs to me, Yat Kohanim boy. Once it belongs to Hegdish, Hatoira Amra Yatsa boy Yedei Gezeloi. And that's the Nakudam that once a person pays the Keren v'Chaimish to Kohanim, let me say these words over here. When a person steals truma from a kohen, forget about a case. Okay, I'm going back to you, Rabbi Mendel. When a person steals truma, forget about the hegdish part from a kohen and eats it. When he pays the keren v'chaimish, he will not be obligated any further obligation, even in a case where he swore falsely. Another din.
you say no hegdish.
Forget about hegdish. That when a person pays the keren v'chaimish for truma, they won't be chayiv any other obligation aside of the case that the Mishnah figured out. There is no Hasham Gezelois penalty when a person pays the keren v'chaimish for truma. And that's something that we learn from Sukkim. Look inside the Marafulda, the second line under the Gemara. Atleira amra yatsi de gezeloi, misha gazal truma, va'achala yatsa betashlume truma, midei gezeloi. Ve'enoi chayev su keren v'choimish b'shvil gezeloi, sheniftar be'keren v'choimish de tashlume truma. That's it. Now, where did he get it from? Where did he learn that from? Where do you know that from? We don't know. Like, where did we get that from? So the Gemara says, Amalei Rabzeil to Rabisi. There are two statements that we have from all of the statements of Rabbi Yechanan. One of them are these. And we talk when we heard the answer, okay, very nice. It's a new din. That there's something unique about the Keren v'choimish of Truma. It's amazing. The Keren v'Truma v'choimish doesn't exclude the problem with Hegdish. That's true. But aside of Hegdish, you're not going to pay more than one choimish. V'leis.
Okay, but also would never apply.
L'choida, that's what they were saying. Very good. That if you gan v'truma and you eat it, once you ate it, so now you evoke the din of Keren v'choimish, there's no other penalty for that. Very good. V'leis atan amrin meha. Now there are two statements. Now, what are the two statements? We don't know yet. We know one of the statements. Amar Rabbi Yechanan. So the first statement is what you just said. That yotza yedei gezeloi. Yud came yapsa nu din. That once a person pays the keren v'choimish for the problem of eating truma, b'shoigig. Even if there was another sin involved, which is the sin of swearing falsely in denial that you owe it, and then you admit you're going to be exempt. Where? V'leis aton amrin. Ma'u kedoin. Where do you get that from? So Rabbi Isi responded, no, I heard it. I just didn't repeat it. In other words, Rabbi Isi, whether it's Rabbi Isi, whether it's Rabbi Yasa, no, it's someone else. But he quoted, it says the following. The same pasuk that we keep on quoting. The pasuk in Parshas Emor. Ve'ish ki yoichal kodesh b'shgaga v'yasav chamishisay olav. And then v'nosan lakoyin es hakodesh. The Rash Shirilio says that the Torah should have written v'nosan lakoyin kodesh. That's what he says. The S and the Ha are extra. V'nosan lakoyin es hakodesh. From there, Mikivin shenas noloi. Once you gave it to him, yotzi yedei gezeloi. Look, let's read inside the Rashidilya on top of the left. V'nosan lakoyin es hakodesh. Mikivin shenas noloi yotzi yedei gezeloi. The Havalei lemichtav, the Torah should have written v'nosan lakoyin kodesh. My es hakodesh. Mashma ze yitein mashachayv mitzad truma. Only this. V'lo yitein yoiser. That's great. Clearly. So if a person swore and this and he denied, there'll be no other chiyuv. Not the chiyuv of the carbon and not the chiyuv of the choimish for Hashem gezelis. Es only give this to exclude anything else. That was his limit. Now that we mentioned that Rab Ze'eda was struggling with two dinim, so let's go to the other din. What was the second din of Rabbi Yechanan? That Atan Amr Moshe, you said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan another din, that even though the Torah says explicitly that the shechita of the paraduma in Parshas Chukas has to be outside of the three machnois, which would mean in the Holy Land, outside Yerushalmi, right? The Holy Temple areas, machne shechina. The Harabayis is machne Levia. Yerushalmi, the walled city, is machne Yisrael. Outside of a walled city is called chutz l'shalosh machnois. So the shechita has to be done there. But Rabbi Yechanan said another din. That exactly in this place, where you slaughter the paraduma, there is where you have to burn it. Where did you get that from? Dafnun chesam at base. V'leis atun amrin minihoin. So Maikedoin. So again, so here Rabbi Lazar b'shem Rabbi Shaya. Whether it was Rabbi Isi that's quoting them, or here the go Rabbi Lazar is quoting b'shem Rabbi Shaya, that on Parshas Chukas it says Al Pirsha Yisroif. That al now just know the pasuk reads v'saraf es hapara le'enov es oira. You have to burn everything: the hide, the meat, the blood, and pirsha means it's waste. No, you don't clean any parts of the animal out. You shecht it and you burn it. Now, from this wording, we're medayik that you got to burn it on the place where you shechted it. How? Ma'at shamet mina. The Gemara is asking, how do you see it from the words al pirsha yisroiv? Yabir mebishem ravimi makoim pirishasa mechayim. Don't only interpret pirsha, the pshat of waste, which would mean that you don't clean out the waste, you burn it in its entirety. But the word pirsha also means pirishasa mechayim, departure. In the place where it departed, sham Tehei Srifasi. And again, I want to read over here that Asherilio that is telling you how to be learned. And he says Gavaldik. Because if the only meaning of the Torah would be the Pshat, then instead of it saying Al Pirsha Yisrael, I'm in the middle of the right column, the Torah should have said that the Sara Es Apara Le'enov would have been consistent. Es Oira, the Es Pesara, the Es Dama, the Es Pirsha. Gavaldik. Be consistent. You shecht it with its hide, with its flesh, with its blood, with its perish, with its waste. The Es Pirsha. What does the Torah say? Al Pirsha. Al Pirsha means Al Makoim Pirishasa. So you have the nemes because of the change in the wordings in the pasuk. And now let's come back to our sugya. So we began today by reviewing the machlokes Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish, without refuting Rabbi Yechanan. Let's quickly again review the machlokes Tanoim that we quoted yesterday. That Rabbi says that matonosoi mikadashtoi. So when I eat truma b'shoigig and I'm mafresh the keren v'choimish, even though we learned also on Nun Zayin Amadalef that according to everyone it has some kedushas truma the moment it was designated. The question is it fully consecrated as truma? Says Rebbe, no. Says Rebbe that when does it become bona fide biblical truma? When you give it the nasan lakoyin as hakodesh matonosei mekadashtoi. Rab Loza but Rab Shimon says af hafroshosei mekadashtoi. Says the Gemara right now that l'chuura the machlokes Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish is aligned to the machlokes of Rebbe and Rab Loza but Rab Shimon. And how is that? Let me just read the words. The Gemara is suggesting that Rabbi Yechanan that says that we have to give it to a kohen. It makes sense. Why does it make sense? Think about it, Aviv. If I ate truma b'shoigig, when I ate it, it belonged to me. Everyone agrees that even though it belonged to me, I have to take my chulin and I have to designate it as the tashlumei truma. And we said that's like a kapara. What I have to do is I have to replace it with a choimish. According to Rebbe, that says that when is it fully imbued with kedushas truma? Only when you give it to a kohen. It fits. It's logical that this fits with what Rabbi Yechanan is saying. What is Rabbi Yechanan saying? Rabbi Yechanan is saying that even if it turned out that when I ate the truma, then already belonged to me, either because I inherited it, or even in a case where someone stole it, but the owner was moichel it, and then when he ate it, it belonged to him. You have to be mafresh it. But according to Rebbe, hafrasha doesn't do it fully. When is it fully truma? Only when you give it. So l'chayda, that's why Rabbi Yechanan says that you have to give it. You have to give it to the shevet. Because since we see that Hashem wants for the one who ate truma b'shoigeg to replace it with a choimish, but it's not just to replace it; he has to take chulin. But the replacement has to become truma, right? The Rebbe says it's only fully truma when you give it to the kohen, so you cannot cut out the giving it to the kohen, which would make sense why Rabbi Yechanan says that you have to give it, even though you ate it when it belonged to you. Gavaldik, mishalom l'shevet. So Rabbi Yechanan kerebi. And on the other hand, it makes sense that Rab Shimon ben Lakish, right? Reish Lakish is Rab Shimon ben Lakish, who says that no, that if I ended up eating my own truma, b'shoigeg, I didn't know it's truma, but it belonged to me. The case that they gave is because the guy who ate it, his zayda was a kohen who passed away, and now it belonged to him. What does Reish Lakish say? Reish Lakish says I don't have to give it to a kohen. I have to only designate it. It fits more that Rab Shimon ben Lakish will follow Rab Loza ben Rab Shimon that says that af hafrashosoi mekadashtoi works. When you were mafresh it, when you designate, it's bona fide truma. That's my kapara. So then I don't have to give it now. I can't eat it, but I can sell it. You get it? It makes sense for these two to align with each other. That is a one-liner over here in the Yerushalmi. Rabbi Yechanan kerebi, Shimon Lakish is kereb Loza ben Rab Shimon. Aber sagt die Gemara, loi, mit an Aleph. No. It's not accurate. It's not accurate, and I'll tell you why. Amar Rabbi Bun Bar Chia. Ve'in yizboir Reb Shimon ben Lakish kerebi. Even if he's not saying you're wrong, but don't limit Reish Lakish only to Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon. Even if you would hold like Rebbe, that says what aviv halkop, that matonosoi mikadashtoi. Aber ubelvad bedover shu zoko klitnei lekoyin. Yes, that only designating it in itself does not fully imbue it with the kedusha of truma. But you know when? Only when it's an item that has to be given to the kohanim. So there is where we teach the pasuk that v'nasan. But Resh Lakish can hold, even according to Rabbi, that even Rabbi is moide, that bedavar she'eno yizako klitnei lekoyin, that if there would be a case, which is an unusual case, but what would be the case, where someone ate truma b'shoigig, but he ate truma that belongs to him. How did he have truma? He yashened it from his grandfather. So mitzad the dina de mamoina, there's no one to whom he has to give it to. The truma that he inherited, what would he do with it? He's not a kohen. He would sell it, but it belongs to him. So whenever there is a scenario, fakert, beginning with the shita of Reish Lakish, where the keren v'choimish does not need to be given to a kohen, the Gemara is arguing, Rabbi Bun Barchi is arguing, even Rabbi will be moida that in that scenario, hafrashasoi is fully mekadashtoi. Aval b'davar she'eno yizakuk litnei lekoyin, Rabbi will be moida that just separating it is going to fully imbue it with kedushas truma. Makes a lot of sense to make that nafkamina. Now we're going to find a precedent for that. But before we find a precedent, that makes sense. In other words, when the obligation is for me to separate and to give, okay, there is a place for Rebbe to say what he says. But whenever, to begin with, the rule would be go in the opposite direction. Whenever the rule is, and according to Reish Lakish, that's the rule. If I ended up eating my own truma, I don't have to give it to anyone. I have to be mafresh it. In such a case, the hafrasha itself will go all the way. You can argue the other way also. That's why the Gemara wants to find a precedent. But this is we have a leg to stand on over here, and therefore don't limit Reish Shimon ben Lakish to Rebbe. I want to say before we go on that we're not limiting Rabbi Yechanan like Rebbe also. Why are we not limiting Rabbi Yechanan like Rebbe? What does Rabbi Yechanan say? Rabbi Yechanan says is that even though it belonged to you, you have to give it to a kohen. I just want to say, even if Rabbi Yechanan would hold, like Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon, that the hafrasha is fully magdashet, you can argue that you have to give it. When do you get your kapara for eating truma?
Oh.
When you give it. There can be such a logic. It goes both ways. In other words, and the Gemara is trying to refute. I think the Gemara is refuting the one that's harder to refute. The other side is easier to refute.
No, don't start the day like this.
Okay.
Okay.
So now, let me just get this over here. Now, where do we find such a precedent? Where even though normally something is a two-step process, it being finalized when you give it to the kohen. But if there is an unusual scenario where you don't have to give it to a kohen, even the shittos that hold that it only gets fully elevated when it's given to a kohen, if it doesn't have to be given fully to a kohen, then yesh shmarkim loimer that it gets fully sanctified in step number one. You don't have to do two steps, hafrasha and nesina. If there's no chiv and nesina, whatever needs to happen by the nesina happens by the hafrasha. We find such a thing. And let me quickly review the case of the din of a petach hamor. So if a person has a male firstborn donkey born into his property, he's obligated to do either or. Either redeem the chamor, the petach hamor, on a sheep or a goat, and the sheep and the goat has to be gifted to a kohen, and if not, you have to decapitate the chamor. Now, there is a Mishnah in Masechtas Bechayros that speaks about the following case, that a person was hifrish pidyon petach hamor. So let's say I have a petach hamor is the name of the firstborn donkey, and I exchanged it on a sheep. Prior to me giving the sheep to the kohen, the sheep died. Whose loss is it? Machlokes Tanoim. It was either I have to decapitate my donkey. When am I relieved from the need of decapitating the donkey? When I gift the redemption to the coin. When I gift it to the coin. If I didn't give it to the coin yet, I'm still in square one. I have to redeem it again and give it to the coin. And if not, decapitate the donkey. Or no, since I redeemed it, my chamoyer is completely freed. And now I know it. I have to give it this, like if I separated truma and the truma burned down. I don't have to separate new truma. My tevel is no longer tevel. Who lost? Whichever coin would have gotten it. The shevet lost. That's the machlokes we have over there. So hifrish pidyon petach hamor v'meis. Rabbi Eliezer says, right in the Yerushalmi without an aleph, that chayavin ba'achre yusoi. Remember just the names. In other words, when is my chamoir freed up from its obligation, from its kedusha? Only when it's gifted to the kohen. If I want to avoid decapitating my donkey, I'm chayiv to separate another sheep, another goat. The owner loses. And what does he compare it to? There is a hekesh that we have of all of the different types of bechoides. So he's makish it to another din, kechamesh shaloyim shalbein. Now this rule all agree to, which is that if I have a son for which I'm going to be chayiv to give to the kohen the 5 shaloyim, the 5 shkalim, so the din is that if I separated the 5 shkalim, but I did not yet give it to a kohen, and I lost them, I have to separate another 5 shloim. The latter statement, there's no machlokes about. That there is a hekesh between the b'choirim, din of b'choira, we have an apostolic that puts it all together. So Rabbi Elazar is makish the din of Peter Chamoir to the din of Pidyon Haben. To the din of Pidyon Haben. The Chachamim argue with Rabbi Elazar and they say, Einam chayavin ka'achri yusoi. They have another hekesh. They're makish, not the firstborn, but they're makish the pidyon part, right? I redeemed my donkey with the sheep. Where else do you have the din of redemption? There is a din of redemption of Meiser Sheni. Now think about it, Aviv. I have produce of Meiser Sheni, and I live too far from Yerushalayim, or I don't want to go today to Yerushalayim, so I redeem it on money. And now I have coins with the kedusha of Meiser Sheni. If I lose those coins, does the produce go back to being Meiser Sheni? Absolutely not. No one argues with that. Once it's redeemed, it's redeemed. It's a little bit different there because I don't have to give it to someone else. But once the pidyon was done, the pidyon is not concluded when you finalize eating the money in Yerushalayim. No, the pidyon was concluded when you were paid it on money. So one is makish the firstborn to the firstborn. One is makish the din of pidyon to the din of pidyon. That's the machlokes Rabbi Elazar and Rab Shimon. Now, here, the Gemara again is being very brief. The Gemara is going to begin with a presumption, again, that the Rebbe follows Rabbi Elazar. Similar, right? What does the Rebbe say? That when you designate the keren v'choimish, because you ate truma b'shoigeg, it's not fully invested with the kedusha of truma. Matonosoi mekadashtoi. Now that you gave it to the kohen, now it's fully sanctified. Choyda, the same thing, that when you give the seh to the kohen, now the seh is fully sanctified. So now it took away the kedusha in the chamor. Prior to giving it to the kohen, even though you already exchanged it, something began to happen, but it's not full, right? It would go together. The chachamim, again, this is the beginning, l'cho'oira are more aligned with Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon. Now, what I just said is not going to be refuted. Aber, nevertheless, Moide Rabbi Eliezer, so Rabbi will hold like Rabbi Eliezer. Let me give you a case where Rabbi Eliezer himself will be Moide, that you're not chayv and achrayis. And what will be that case? So let me share this. Now this case gets really happening because we began today's share, Machlekes Rabbi Yechanan and Ish Lakish, about a simple case. There was a Zayda who was a kohen, right? A Yisrael has a maternal grandfather who's a kohen. The kohen passes away. But often where it's shayach that the Yerusha goes down to the Yisrael grandson, so he can yarshin truma. The case was that he stole it before his Zayda passed away. Doesn't matter. Okay. Now, let me give you a better case. I want to say a couple of steps over here. Step number one is like this. Offsprings of donkeys that are born in the property of a kohen, chevra, are exempt from the din of Petach HaMoed. This is unlike produce, that's tevel. By tevel, everyone has to be mafresh. But the din is that if you have a chamoed that's born into the earth, into the property of a kohen, then it's completely exempt. So that's not going to be the case over here. The case over here is there's two series, there's many generations. They all have arichus yamam over here. So what happened is like this. You have a kohen, you have a non-kohen zayda, a Yisrael who has a daughter who married a kohen, and he has a grandson who's a kohen. I'm beginning with that. It has to be that way. So you have a chamoir that was born into the property of a Yisrael. When it was born, it didn't belong to a kohen. So now you have the chiyuv of either or redeem it or decapitate. The zayda passed away. Now a kohen owns. Now he owns whatever his zayda owned. What will be the din over here? The din over here will be L'Kula Alma, that the chiyuv of pidyon the kohen will have. He's a kohen, doesn't matter. He inherited something that was already mechuyev to be redeemed. But when he'll redeem it on a seh, he won't have to give it to any kohen because he's a kohen. That was the din when he inherited. He did nothing. But now the status is when the Zayda owned it, the original Zayda owned it, pidyon, giving it. He passes away. The pinion was not done yet. So now his daughter's son, the kohen, in that case, who yarshened it, is chayiv to do the pinion, but he loses the chiyuv of giving it. What did he do? Nothing. Now he passed away. He had a daughter who had a son. Now a Yisrael owns it. It's a given that the son cannot be mechuyev to do something more than the Zayda. So good.
Does she have to have a son, or should we just have a husband that's Yisrael? And then it would be like hers. She Yarshin.
Midrabanan, a husband yarshins his wife. I wonder what will be the din of.
She doesn't have any brother. Go to her.
Okay.
I'm saying we don't have to add another generation.
I think we always add the other generation. I think because since a husband yarshining the wife is only midrabanan, could be the dinim will be different over here. I'm not sure. We're speaking about Yerusha din Torah. Yerusha din Torah will be this case. Yeah. A father to a daughter. I'm saying from a wife to the husband is only a derabana. No, but she's married. She's married to a Yisrael. Could be. But let me go back over. This is very important to chap. The middle Zayda, the grandson who's the Zayda, cannot undo the chiyuv of the origin. Everyone gets the coin. So the coin, the Zayda was chayiv, but since he's a coin and he yarshened, the chiyuv changed by him. It's chayiv to make the pidyon. He's not chayiv to give it. Now that he passes away, this step is important. Now we're talking about the new Yoidish, the second Yoidish, whoever the second Yoidish is a Yisrael. He's chayiv to do a pidyon, but he's not chayiv to give it. A unique case. And the Gemara, now what, he has to make a pidyon, he has to redeem it, the sheep, and then he gets to keep the sheep. So now, says the Gemara, in that case, listen to this, I'm just explaining that the Avi Imoy Koyen was not the original owner. If not, you have the kasha that we resolved, that the Avi Imoy HaKoyen, says the Marafulda, had himself an Avi Imoy She'ena Koyen. In such a case, what were to happen now if the second grandson is mafresh, he does the redemption of the chamoid on a seh, on a goat or a sheep, and then it dies? Even the Tana Rabbi Lazar will hold, Mikiven Shehefrishoy, the moment he designated it. The word kache means that the redemption takes effect, which means that now if this said dies, even Rabbi Lazar will be moida that you don't have to make another redemption. So it's a gavaldik raya. So what do you see over here? That even Rabbi Lazar that holds that the full redemption only happens when you give it to a kohen. That's only when you have to give it to a kohen. There is where we say that the redemption does part, but it's only finalized when you give it. Al derech in the case of Rabbi, that even though Rabbi says that matanosei mikadashtoi, the Gemara is saying when you have to give it. When you have to give it, you can afford to say the hafrasha didn't do it fully when you gave it. But in the case of Reish Lakish, we're arguing that Reish Lakish can hold like Rebbe, where you're not chayiv to give it, because Reish Lakish holds if I ate up my own truma, I only have to be mafresh truma. Even Rebbe will be moidem that the hafrasha will be fully mekadosh it. And that's the precedent that we have. We all know that the Rabbi Lazar in Bechayres will say, Mikiven shefrishoy kachoi. Nigavaldik. This is great. I was hoping to get a few lines further, but it's good.